the Château de Chenonceau. Built in the heart of the Loire Valley and renowned for its unique architecture, it's the only castle in the world ever erected directly over a river. It features a 60-meter, two-story gallery illuminated by 36 windows built over a 5-arch bridge spanning the Cher River. A building with a singular style, flanked with a chapel and a library on the eastern facade, with perfect dimensions.
It's borderline insane. They built a leisure palace over the water.
Using the foundation of an old fortified mill of the 13th century, the builders of Chenonceau managed to turn a simple medieval castle into an architectural masterpiece.
At least 2 of the facades display perfect symmetry on both sides of a middle axis.
It's the most modern of the time. There was nothing like it back then.
It's beautifully illuminated thanks to the chapel, the hallway, the rooms, and the ante-rooms. The castle is bathed in light.
The architecture of the Château de Chenonceau is absolutely unique.
How did French builders manage to develop such a structure on water over 500 years ago? What technical prowess did they achieve in order to harness the river?
The goal was to allow a single worker to lift weights between 500 and 800 kilos.
Francis I, Henry II, and his mistress Diane de Poitiers, Catherine de Medici, how did the successive owners of the castle succeed in making it one of the most significant buildings of the Renaissance?
Catherine de Medici wanted to turn Chenonceau into a royal castle.
If she had succeeded, Chenonceau would have been some sort of Versailles before its time.
Thanks to access granted to hidden parts of the castle, expert testimonies, and reenactments through computer-generated images, you're about to discover the incredible architectural saga behind the Château de Chenonceau, the unrivaled jewel of the French Renaissance. The Loire Valley is the blessed territory of the French Renaissance. It's in the heart of this region, about 200 kilometers south of Paris, near the city of Tours, that the famous Château of the Loire Valley was built in the 15th and 16th centuries. Among them is a castle like no other, Chenonceau. It's the only one ever built on water spanning the Cher, a tributary river of the Loire. Nowadays, the Château de Chenonceau welcomes 850,000 visitors annually. It has achieved worldwide fame for its Renaissance residence, surrounded by 4-cornered turrets in which 15 rooms were restored. Adjoining the home is a 60-meter-long, 6-meter-wide, 2-story gallery linking both banks of the Cher River. On the right bank is a 30-meter medieval donjon. It is surrounded by 17,000 square meters of gardens, giving it a prestige worthy of the greatest castles in France. However, in the beginning, the Château de Chenonceau bears no resemblance to what it looks like today. It all started around the 13th century, during the Middle Ages. In those days, there are no gardens, no galleries, and no bridges crossing the Cher. Not even a residence built over the river. Instead lies a simple medieval castle with a fortified mill belonging to the Marques, a family of lords from central France. The location on the right bank of the Cher makes it strategic to control the intense river traffic heading towards the Loire and to charge transit fees.
There are very few images and drawings available of the castle, but we do have a few written descriptions. Thanks to these written accounts, we suppose it resembled a typical castle back then, with 4 corner towers, 4 curtain walls, and most likely a drawbridge over water-filled moats.
Built against the main structure of the Marques castle, the fortified mill is directly on the water and activated by the river's flow. But at the end of the 15th century, the Marc family is facing financial difficulties.
The Marc were very poor managers, and thus, riddled with debts and distrusted by their creditors, they were forced to sell. It was Thomas Boyer who bought the castle. Boyer was also from the center of France, but more importantly, he was a financier. His exact title was General of Finances of Normandy. This type of general didn't have any troops or armed soldiers. The General of Finances was tasked with the collection of the state funds.
In 1513, the Marc castle has new owners. General of Finances Thomas Boyer, a rich middle-class man recently ennobled, and his wife Catherine Bressonnet. This acquisition marks the starting point of the story of the Château de Chenonceau as we know it today. Thomas Boyer starts by demolishing the medieval castle, a relic of bygone days. He keeps only one fragment still visible today, this round tower named after the first owners of the castle, the Marc Tower. Meanwhile, Thomas Boyer makes substantial changes to the appearance of the medieval donjon and turret. He adds large windows, cone-shaped roofs, and a bell tower at the top.
He decided to keep the tower, not because he didn't have the means to demolish it, but because it was a symbol of social standing. He didn't keep it in a defensive view, since he added windows, which made it useless, militarily speaking. But having a tower in front of his castle established his new standing as a lord.
What this defensive device lacked in efficiency, it made up with its strong symbolic power, since only noblemen were allowed to fortify their residence when granted authorization by the king. It was his way of showing his new rank and noble status.
But the rearrangements of the tower are just the beginning of the great architectural ambitions of Thomas Boyer and his wife. Starting in 1514, a brand new building begins to emerge. Its distinctive feature is that it's not built along the Cher, like the old Marc castle, but directly over the river. An architectural feat never achieved before.
Once Thomas Boyer demolished the Marquis castle while keeping only the tower, he decided to use the pillars, over which the previous owners had set up on the old mill, to erect his castle directly over the Cher.
Using the existing foundations of the old fortified mill, Thomas Boyer creates the base for his new castle. The super-solid structure is built with limestone, found directly on the riverbed. It comprises two lateral sections, each 10 meters in width and linked by an archway, allowing the water of the Cher to flow through. To this day, no one knows exactly how the workers managed to build a structure that has been withstanding the test of time for over 500 years. Even experts like Gilles Delage
I don't see any.
aren't able to distinguish the stones of the old mill from the ones added by the Boyers.
It's practically impossible to tell the difference between the two, and this prevents us from imagining the geometry of the old mill. Today, there's a coherent structure of very good quality on the entire foundations of the Boyer residence.
The next step for the Boyer couple is to erect a brand new castle on the freshly built foundations.
During the second part of the 15th century, after the end of the 100 Years' War, the appropriate conditions were in place to allow for an architectural change. Before that, castles were built inward, facing the inward courtyard around which were erected high walls with towers, ensuring their defense. But with the progress and the development of artillery, these high walls became obsolete. This led to the building of castles that looked outward and onto their surroundings.
Over the foundations of the old mill, the Poitiers build an almost perfect square of 22 meters by 23, equipped with 4 corner towers. Unlike the classic castles of the Middle Ages, the Poitiers castle isn't built around an inner courtyard.
The originality of Chenonceau lies in the architectural choice of offering views on all sides of the castle. In other words, this castle is completely turned towards the outside world, since the various buildings are no longer organized around an inner courtyard like they used to be.
The conception of each facade of the castle, still called the Poitiers residence to this day, demonstrates the owner's will to give it a unique aesthetic. On the eastern side, they add a chapel and a library to their quasi-perfect square. On the southern side, the many windows and the belvedere overlooking the river offer visitors a breathtaking view. The windows situated on the roof level and on each side of the western and northern faces are perfectly symmetrical.
I'd like to point out Thomas Boyer's effort to have even facades. Back then, it was quite acceptable to have windows that weren't perfectly symmetrical, and some were often narrower than others. Chenonceau was very innovative with that regard as well, because it displays 2 facades with perfect symmetry on each side of a middle axis.
Another distinctive feature of Chenonceau is that each facade is entirely covered with finely detailed sculptures, the legacy of a style that appeared in France at the beginning of the 15th century.
In flamboyant Gothic architecture, decorations were very important. One could say they couldn't stand empty spaces, and so all ornamental fields were covered with decorations. It appears that Chenonceau is in line with this particular style. When you look at the facades of Chenonceau, all the ornamental fields are filled with patterns. Not a single frieze or pilaster is left bare, in an effort to cover most of these elements with decorations.
If the Poitiers castle is decorated with thousands of moldings, it's notably because of the special stone with which it is built. A white, bright, delicate, and particularly malleable material called tuffeau stone.
Tuffeau stone had been used in the Loire Valley since the antiquity. It absorbs light and it reflects it too. It's partly due to its grain and probably also because of its tenderness. It appears to take in the light and project it back. It's not really white. It can even be yellow or quite ochre sometimes. That gives it the ability to vibrate with the color of the sky, which works very well.
In the 16th century, there are a few dozen quarries of tuffeau stone in the area. The stones of Chenonceau all come from there. Today, almost all the quarries are closed, except one in Villentois, where tuffeau stone is still extracted for restoration purposes. Nowadays, the extraction techniques have evolved. Back then, workers would extract the blocks with only a few simple tools, such as picks, stone axes, wedges, and mallets.
They extracted the stones with what they called picks. They dug trenches on both sides of the block that they needed, and then 2 or more over and underneath. They slid in wedges and broke off the bottom so that the block would fall onto itself before they took it out. We can still see the traces left from the pick extraction in all the old quarries. The stones continued to be extracted using this method until mechanization occurred between the First and the Second World War.
Thanks to this technique, a single man could extract a block weighing several hundred kilograms in one day. Tuffeau's stone established its pedigree during the Renaissance period, when the spectacular chateau of the Loire Valley started to emerge. Like the majority of these other castles, Chenonceau is extremely well preserved. Inside, the condition of the building is just as remarkable. Upon entering the Boyer residence, one is immediately struck by the long hallway and its ceiling of ribbed vaults in a zigzag pattern. The 22-meter-long, 4-meter-wide gallery provides access to several rooms on each side. The same pattern holds true on the first floor. The turrets offer additional space in which wardrobes and bathrooms are set up. This layout is extremely innovative for its time and goes completely against traditional medieval castles.
La distribution traditionnelle des châteaux.
The standard layout of 15th and even 16th century castles is like this. You enter the castle through a stairway, giving access to a large room. Behind this room is the bedroom, followed by a wardrobe and sometimes a remote bathroom. At the end of this succession of rooms is the gallery, which in those days was solely for the owners of the castle. In Chenonceau, it's a different concept altogether. You access the various halls and rooms directly from this big hallway, which is also used as a gallery.
The concept of setting up various rooms around a central gallery will later be reproduced in several constructions of the Renaissance. But for now, Chenonceau is one of the first castles to adopt this innovative layout. Another original feature is that the large kitchen is nestled inside the pillars of the old mill and accessible through several service staircases.
Usually, in castles, the kitchen was located further away because of the inherent risk of fire. Here, we have a unique setup where the kitchen is right underneath the main rooms of the castle.
Once again, this was very innovative. We'll have to wait until the 17th and 18th centuries to see kitchens built underneath the castle instead of the communal areas. The main advantage of building the kitchen there was obviously that the supply was done through the river instead of the patio. This way, the hallway became the main public spot where service, handling, evacuation, and deliveries took place through the pier set between the two pillars of the mill.
Beyond the spacious kitchen and the splendid gallery leading the visitors as they enter the castle, according to the experts, the most original feature of Chenonceau is there, on the right of the hallway. It's the stairway between the ground and the first floor. In most French castles, stairways are showcased in towers protruding from the main structure. And they're usually spiral stairways. But none of these rules were applied to Chenonceau. The stairway is integrated inside the residence itself and cast on the right side of the hallway. It's also not a spiral stairway, but a straight one, a half-base staircase with a single half-turn midway.
It's the creme de la creme in terms of modernity. There are no others dating from that time except in the Bury Castle, which doesn't exist anymore. We only know about it through illustrations.
Even more surprising, the staircase doesn't touch the wall of the building. A meter-wide space is spared in between. Thanks to this trick, the Poitiers and their chief architect managed to maintain the regularity of the west facade. On the outside, the large window isn't disrupted by a flight of steps, and the presence of the staircase is undetectable from the outside.
L'escalier rampe sur rampe à moitié tournante est à la fois
The innovative half-paced stairway brought a modern touch while allowing to create regularity on the facades, which was highly sought
de
after.
recherche de régularité sur les façades. Et par ailleurs, cela permet
Furthermore,
de baigner
it bathes the stairway in natural light.
naturelle, hein. Et donc, avec
Through the guardrails surrounding the turning point and the diaphragm arches supporting the stones over the passageways,
qui vont porter les dalles
we can see transparency effects in a flamboyant style that give life to the stairway.
dans le goût flamboyant et qui vont permettre d'animer fortement donc les volets de marche.
Lighting and the surrounding view on the Cher. Such were the main priorities in the conception of the Poitiers residence 5 centuries ago.
Thomas Boyer played with light. I think he even prioritized light over the views. His castle is generously illuminated on all 4 facades, thanks to the chapel, the hallway, the rooms, and the anterooms, which are all full of windows. I'm sure the view was an important element for him, but I think that light was his priority, as the castle is bathed in light. Boyer was most likely influenced by his Italian acquaintances. Since he was very close to young Venetian doges, we suppose that he traveled to Venice often or that he at least heard a lot about it. Many experts agree that Chenonceau was influenced by Venetian architecture.
This unrivaled building in all of France is conceived as a sort of palace on the water. However, Thomas Boyer and his wife, Catherine Brissonnet, would only enjoy their Venetian castle in the province of Tours for a very short while. Thomas dies in Italy in 1524, and his wife passes away 2 years later.
C'est leur fils qui hérite du château.
Their son inherited the castle, but around that time, Francis I launched an investigation into his financiers, who most likely confused their personal savings with the state's coffers.
Et c'est là
That's when the tables turned for the family, and Thomas Boyer's son was sentenced to reimburse the extraordinary amount of 190,000 livres tournois, which is difficult to gauge in terms of today's value.
une évaluation aujourd'hui.
In order to pay back his parents' debt, Antoine Boyer gives the castle to King Francis I. In 1535, Chenonceau thus becomes a royal castle. Francis I enjoys Chenonceau, but he rarely stays there. Upon his death in 1547, his son Henry II inherits the throne. He then decides to give Chenonceau to his mistress, a certain Diane de Poitiers. The king's favorite knows Chenonceau very well, since she's visited it on several occasions. Among her many ambitions for her new residence, one is particularly important. She wants to build a vast and magnificent garden. In 1551, work begins on a land spreading over 12,000 square meters east of the castle, on the shore of the Cher River.
We know there used to be a barley field that was covered in order to set up a garden on the east side of the castle. This land was chosen specifically because the king's apartments were located on the same side. A view of the garden became an essential element reserved to the most beautiful quarters of the castle.
Construction spans over 5 years. Diane de Poitiers is thinking on a grand scale. Her goal is to build a rectangular flower bed of 120 meters by 100, surrounded by water-filled moats that are 10 meters wide and with elevated walkways all around the garden.
Diane de Poitiers decided to use a particular shape, which is basically an island. The idea was to create a platform in a pond, or in this case, directly on the riverbank. By doing so, she wanted to display that she had the means to undertake this kind of work, but mostly that she was able to harness water as a way to increase her prestige.
On the southwest corner of the flower bed, a now-defunct lock is installed to regulate the water level in the moats and therefore manage the tumult of the river. The project is colossal. In total, several thousand workers take turns between 1551 and 1556. Finally, one of the most beautiful gardens of the Loire Valley emerges. A garden, the size and beauty of which rival that of the most prestigious royal flower beds. As soon as the work on the garden is completed, Diane de Poitiers sets out on an even more ambitious project.
She had a goal that was very dear to her, and that was to conquer the left bank. It was a land perfectly suited to unobstructed and perspective views that were increasingly popular at the time. It would make for a stunning garden.
A second garden on the other side of the river is Diane de Poitiers' new goal. And for that, she needs to start by building a bridge. This is a new challenge for Philibert Delorme, the architect in charge. He must build something integrating the existing castle, but without altering it. Specifically, the magnificent opening on the Cher of the central hallway must be preserved at all cost.
The Boyer hallway was meant to be first and foremost an access system, but it almost served as a gallery too. It led all the way to the opposite facade with a beautiful opening on the Cher. There was a window that gave fantastic lighting and also a belvedere, as they used to call it, where one could step outside and admire the river.
In order to preserve the natural light provided by the tall window at the end of the hallway, Philibert Delorme envisions joining a bridge to the southern facade of the Boyer castle, yet slightly off-center. Work begins in 1556. The first step is to build the pillars of the future building.
At the time of construction, the Cher was very shallow, about 4 months out of the year. Basically, from June to September, and sometimes even through October, when it didn't rain a lot, there was hardly any water. And so it was easy to divert whatever water was left in order to clear the rocks and build over them.
At first, the workers start by diverting the river flow, most likely with small earth dikes set up around the 5 areas selected for the construction of the pillars. Then, they lay down stone blocks that will be used as the pillars' sidings. Inside these forms, mortar and rubble stones are cast in to solidify them. Once the pillars are built, they're connected by wooden structures molding the shape of the arches, as designed by the architect. On these structures, called entrados, cut stones are laid one by one to finally form the archways of the bridge.
They built the structure directly over the rocky bottom. This made for a high-quality foundation. It wouldn't deteriorate since it had been there for a long time. It allowed them to lay down the bases and build rapidly.
At the time, the demands of architect Philibert Delorme are very clear. He wants the arches of the bridge to be identical and reaching the same height in order for the overall look to achieve perfection. But the workers are unable to meet the requirements of the architect, and small differences can be noticed between each span. The pillar closest to the Boyer building is 10 centimeters narrower than the next two, which are 7 centimeters narrower than the fourth. The arches of the Chenonceau bridge are not all the same width. This difference is visible to the naked eye, despite pertaining to only a few centimeters.
The space between the pillars is a mystery. Why doesn't the bridge have regular arches, but asymmetrical ones instead? One of the explanations could lie in the rocky outcrops that may have been easier to work with.
The workers most likely had to build the arches over an irregular riverbed. These difficulties considerably delayed the work. The construction of the bridge finally ends in 1559. 60 meters long and 5.85 meters wide, it ends on the south side with a castellum, turrets, and a drawbridge. Diane de Poitiers' project is a success. The bridge is now part of the castle without altering the appearance of the building erected by the Boyers. But the king's mistress won't have time to build the garden she envisioned on the left bank of the Cher. On July 10, 1559, just a few months after the completion of the bridge, her lover, King Henry II, is killed during a tournament. For Catherine de Medici, Henry II's wife, who's spent all this time in the shadow of her rival, it's time for revenge.
After the death of Henry II, Diane de Poitiers fell in disgrace since she was the king's mistress. The king being dead, she had no right to be there. Catherine de Medici, who became queen regent and took over power, expelled her from the court and forced her to exchange the Château de Chenonceau for the Château de Chaumont.
Diane tried to explain that she had a deed proving her purchase, but Catherine insisted and ended up retrieving the castle. She didn't confiscate it, instead exchanging the castle for another one. It was even to Diane's benefit because the Chaumont domain was worth more, as it was bigger than Chenonceau. So financially speaking, Diane was better off. But symbolically, Chaumont was incomparable to Chenonceau. Catherine hence proved that from now on, she was in charge.
After her husband's death, Catherine de Medici takes control of the kingdom, her sons being too young to rule. She must face a troubled situation as Catholics and Protestants are engaged in a violent power struggle. This period is scarred by the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre in August of 1572, when thousands of Protestants are killed. Despite the extreme tensions across the kingdom, in the eyes of Catherine de Medici, the Château de Chenonceau remains a place away from it all, where gathering and enjoying oneself remain possible.
The key word of Catherine de Medici's politics was conciliation, and so she dealt with the extreme unrest by putting on a face of peace and harmony. And during all the religion wars, she used Chenonceau as a place for reconciliation. She never stopped looking at the castle as a venue for political mediation. The castle has no blood on its walls.
Catherine de Medici is deeply attached to Chenonceau, and she has great plans for her castle. First of all, she starts by building 2 gardens. The first is located west of the castle and spreads over 5,500 square meters. The second is built on the other bank of the Cher, in line with the bridge. Today, only the one located on the right bank of the Cher still exists. The second is now covered by a forest. But the Queen Mother comes from a family of builders. Her ambitions for Chenonceau aren't limited to the gardens.
Catherine de' Medici wanted to turn Chenonceau into a real royal castle, meaning it had to accommodate the entire court. She wanted a large court that would eventually get bigger. That's why she needed to free up space inside the castle in order to create accommodations for the courtesans and other spaces for holding receptions and entertainment. That's how she got the idea of topping the bridge crossing the Cher with not one but two galleries, one over the other, plus an attic.
Catherine continues to think on a grand scale. She aims to build two 60-meter-long, 6-meter-wide galleries, one over the other, topped with an attic and a slate roof. The project is unprecedented for its time and will once again mobilize a considerable workforce. In order to operate over the bridge, the workers build large wood scaffoldings. To this day, one can still see the remains of these old constructions. The small holes in the stone walls are called putlog holes. This is where the horizontal poles that carried the scaffolding boards would fit. However, the main challenge for these workers is to lift several hundred kilos of stones from the bank.
We have very few traces, just some illustrations and texts about their lifting systems. But all these stones were not lifted by hand. That's absolutely impossible. All the way up, on the tall chimneys, are stones that weigh around 350 kilos, so they clearly didn't get there on someone's back. They had to be lifted somehow.
According to specialists, the workers most likely used what is called a lifting jack. This device is considered to be the ancestor of the crane. Used as far back as the antiquity, the lifting jack is made of several beams laid out in a triangle, on top of which are several pulleys. This way, the forces are multiplied and a single man can lift a substantial weight simply by pulling on a rope.
The main goal was to allow a single person, or with the help of another one, to lift weights from 500 to 800 kilos. More importantly, these types of crane couldn't be too sophisticated because they had to be easily moved around.
But while her rival, Diane de Poitiers, had done everything in her power to preserve the aesthetics of the southern facade of the Boyer building, by decentering the bridge in relation to the hallway, Catherine de' Medici and her double gallery project will completely change that side of the castle.
The core modification of Diane de Poitiers' plan led to two negative effects, if you will. It hid and altered the southern facade, but above all, it considerably darkened the hallway of Chenonceau. Since instead of decentering the bridge, all of the different parts of the castle became linked, which covered the balcony and turned it into a hallway.
This big project, elaborated by Catherine de' Medici, completely covered the Boyer facade and made it disappear, which is what Diane de Poitiers had always avoided.
In total, the construction of the gallery will take 5 years. But in the end, Catherine de' Medici's goal is achieved, and thanks to its large galleries, Chenonceau is now a castle of royal stature. Outside, the decorations of the facades are carefully executed, following a second Renaissance style, more refined than in Boyer's time. Inside, both floors of the gallery are bathed in light, thanks to the presence of 18 windows per floor. To decorate her castle, Catherine de' Medici spends a fortune on Italian works of art. As to the castle itself, Catherine has new windows added on the north face to bring in more light. On the eastern side, she adds a two-story building between the chapel and the library to increase her accommodation capacity.
Catherine clearly saw Chenonceau as a royal castle, and it was assuredly the one to which she was the most attached. All these projects were undertaken to make it more dazzling.
But Catherine de Médicis doesn't stop there. She has an even crazier project.
Catherine de Medici wasn't content with building her galleries over the river. She had a project even more important and ambitious. Let's not forget that she was a builder and an art lover. She's the one who built the Tuileries in Paris. She had another castle built in the vicinity of Paris that doesn't exist anymore, the Château de Saint-Maur.
Catherine de Médicis entrusts an extension project at Chenonceau to Jacques-André du Cerceau, one of the greatest architects at the time. She wants to add several new buildings. First of all, two big rectangular halls over the Cher on both sides of the entrance. Then, two elliptical buildings surrounding the old platform of the Marc Castle. All of this will be preceded by a vast forecourt of trapezoidal shape, also surrounded by more reception and concert halls.
The blueprints were inspired by the Italian palatial architecture, with intricate, grandiose, surprising, and unexpected compositions. There was a Baroque element to it. It would have been something else. Had it been completed, Chenonceau would have been Versailles before its time.
This project, which reduces the original castle to a tiny central pattern, begins in 1580 with the construction of the Dôme wing, which is meant to accommodate the Queen Mother's employees. But the other extensions will never see the light of day. The kingdom's coffers are empty, and the monarchy is in no position to spend that much money on Chenonceau. On the other side of the castle, several stones are evidence of the unfinished work. This is the southern end of the gallery. On these walls, one can clearly see stones sticking out of the facades. A bit further, these windows seem unfinished.
We can clearly see that the ends of the south gallery brutally stop with stone connecting elements still left on the facade, but also some sculptures showing the beginning of at least one additional span. Du Cerceau's master plan could have been to add another arch to supporting all of this, with either a bridge or a large stairway leading to the vast gardens envisioned by Catherine.
Are these protruding stones the only remains of the ambitious project of Catherine de Médicis and her architect Jacques-André du Cerceau? No one can say for certain, but according to the experts, that theory is very plausible. On January 5, 1589, Catherine de Médicis dies at the age of 71. With her, any new ambition to build an extension to Chenonceau disappears. After her death, Louise of Lorraine, the widow of Henry III, son of Catherine de Médicis and Henry II, inherits the castle. She too will leave a remarkable mark, but this time inside the castle. Following the death of her husband, she has this unique room decorated entirely black.
This was a terrible loss for her, and she mourned in Chenonceau. She had a room arranged next to the chapel, which she had stained black with silver decorations depicting tears, gravedigger shovels, and feathers, representing the sadness she was feeling, as well as emblems of her order and other various patterns, expressing her state of mind.
Later on, at the beginning of the 17th century, the Duchess of Vendôme invites a dozen of Capuchin nuns to live in the attic of the castle. One of the unique remains of this era is a drawbridge built inside Chenonceau to isolate the nuns from the rest of the world. During the second half of the 19th century, the castle undergoes new modifications. At that time, the residence is acquired by Marguerite Pelouse, an immensely rich woman. She decides to restore Chenonceau to the style of the early 16th century. On the main facade, the windows added by Catherine de Medici are torn down and rebuilt based on the original blueprint. The building between the chapel and the library is also demolished. Instead, the Boyer Terrace reappears, along with its turrets. The chapel's tower bell is also restored, and the gardens are redone in accordance with the initial blueprints.
It was the first time that a 19th century owner put forth the idea that the value of the castle was partly due to its age. In the 17th and 18th century, people would inherit castles and they didn't hesitate to demolish old buildings to update them. In this case, it was a completely different logic. She followed this idea and restored the castle to its original state, at least based on the information at her disposal. Mrs. Pelouse took her projects pretty far. She did things that would be impossible today, such as restoring the building according to the illustrations available to her. She gave it a beautiful first Renaissance facade, even though it was modified in the 19th century.
The huge tasks taken on by Marguerite Pelouse lead to her bankruptcy. She's forced to sell the castle at the end of the 19th century. In 1913, it is bought by the Mignet family. More so than any other castle, Chenonceau embraces the turmoil of the 20th century. During World War I, it serves as a military hospital sheltering over 2,000 wounded that are treated in a reorganized gallery. When World War II breaks out some 20 years later, the castle is once again at the heart of history. And with good reason, the bridge above the Cher becomes a strategic passageway between the occupied and the free zone.
The Cher was the demarcation line, so when you entered the castle, you were in occupied territory, but when you exited on the other side, you were in the free zone. Up until 1942, the gallery served to get quite a number of people across.
Today, the castle still belongs to the Mignet family, and the transformations continue, especially in the gardens. A few years back, 4 forgotten drawings by famous English landscaper Russell Page were randomly found. These are blueprints he had drawn for Chenonceau between 1953 and 1957. As a result, the owners entrusted Nicholas Tomlin with the mission of creating a garden around the castle based on these historical sketches.
I wanted to create something that was in line with Russell Page's ideas and not just copy the blueprints, because to him, it was important to discover the soul of a place. I spent a lot of time here before creating the garden. I made a few sketches, and that's how the project started taking shape.
Open to the public in 2018, the garden created by Nicholas Tomlin is the last addition to this unique location, the story of which began over 500 years ago. From a simple medieval castle equipped with a fortified mill that was later knocked down, Chenonceau never stopped changing through the years. To a residence of perfect dimensions was added a bridge spanning the river. and finally, the two-story gallery. All around, the gardens were also extended along the way. Ever bigger and ever more prestigious. 500 years of history gave rise to this splendid castle of unique physiognomy.
The atmosphere in Chenonceau is spellbinding. One cannot remain indifferent to the castle and its surroundings.
The main characteristic of the Château de Chenonceau is its charm. The fact that it combines a residence with a river, a flowing river involving movement under its arches, that's all part of the charm of the castle.
Chenonceau is also known as the Ladies' Castle. Catherine Brissonnet, Diane de Poitiers, Catherine de Medici, Marguerite Pelouse. Its history is marked by a nearly continuous succession of women who built it, modified it, made it more beautiful, and protected it. Even today, it is owned by Laure Meunier, a woman. She's adding her own personal touch to a castle as enchanting as it is unique and forever evolving.